Hello, folks. Hey, we're back again talking again about Unmaking a Murderer by Shaun Attwood. Uh, Today we are here to talk about Strategy 7. Strategy 7 is neutralizing honest witnesses. So it's going to go through here basically how witnesses that were there to attest that Stephen couldn't have been at the beach and things like that were neutralized by the prosecution by Vogel. So, anyway, he starts out by saying that honest witnesses can be neutralized in a number of ways, which are, that they can, number one, they can just be straight ignored. They can just be ignored completely by the police, and therefore their testimony will never make it into court because it was never taken in a statement or there for a lawyer to see to call them in. So generally, you can just ignore, a witness, and then therefore you eliminate them. Doesn't always work, but generally most of the time it does. Then you can also, your other option is that when you have a witness on the stand, you can basically discredit them. You can, or make them seem undesirable. You can use something personal or whatever to make them seem undesirable, which then therefore makes them seem uncredible or incredible to a jury, and therefore that nullifies their testimony. So that's two different ways you can go with getting rid of honest witnesses. But anyway, he then moves into talking about Dave Bagaka. Now, Dave Bagaka believes that there's a bigger picture to Teresa's death himself. He believes that it revolves around the financial interests of some of the more powerful people there in Manitowoc and in that area. He believes that the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department is the strong arm of those people that essentially does their dirty work or their bidding type of deal. And when he heard the thing is that when he heard about Kratz's deviant sexual behavior and the sexting and stuff like that, he thought it fit right in with the secret society that he's talked about. If any of you know, that he's talked about on YouTube. The thing is that I don't know about everything about the secret society here, but one thing that occurs to me about that area is that this secret society, or what I would call a good old boys club that I believe exists there. I believe that there is some evidence that suggests that it really is there, because, and one thing that sticks out in my mind that makes me say this is when you think about the fact that the coroner was barred from the Avery salvage yard during the investigation. She was barred by Peterson and two other high-ranking officials. That's, who are the other two other high-ranking officials, and what is the good reason for them to bar the coroner, who, number one, had no previous conflict of interest with Stephen's 1985 case against Penny Bernstein, but they also could have used an expert there. They didn't call in. I mean, and so if they even have, okay, let's say they have a good reason for that. Let's say there's some good reason they come up with to explain why they didn't want her there, that there was a reason and there was a good reason for it. Okay, fine. Let's say that happens. Okay, well then how do you explain the fact that you didn't call crime scene tech Ertl right away? And you didn't, number one, you didn't have him doing the collection, but you didn't call him right away, and he wasn't even able to take any pictures before everybody was digging in with shovels and getting ready to sift. So, no matter how you look at it, there's just there is something strange happening there, and so it's odd. So, whatever you think about Dave Bagaka, you got to say that there is definitely something strange there. I would go venture as to call it a good old boys club. So, anyways, that's basically how I feel about that. So then we'll move on into where Shaun talks about Dr. Penrod. Dr. Penrod was brought in to talk about how the human memory works and how it can be like manipulated, or how it can be, somewhat faulty or malleable even. And so he comes in to talk about how when Penny was in the first, couple of hours after the attack and stuff, that she was kind of probably like in a bit of a sense of shock and everything, but she was actually, awake and aware, but she was certainly shaken up, and that at that point in time, in the first initial hours after an incident like that, that the brain can be kind of malleable in some of the way it remembers some of the facts. But the fact is that the first set of her first account of what her attacker looked like literally does not match Stephen Avery. I mean, they eventually talked to her and eventually kind of got her to fudge things, got her to eventually say that the attacker had brown eyes instead of blue, she originally said it was brown eyes, but then she changed it to blue because Stephen had blue eyes and stuff like that. But sorry. So that's what he's kind of talking about. And what happened is that Dennis Vogel, after listening to everything Penrod had to say in cross-examination, essentially kind of used Penrod's own argument about how the memory can be malleable and that sort of thing to essentially explain away 16 people's recollection of where Stephen was on that day. 16 alibi witnesses that could attest for Stephen's whereabouts. And there's even a receipt from Green Bay at 5:8 or 5:13. So there's 16 alibi witnesses and that, and yet somehow Vogel is able to turn this all around and say that 16 people's memories were malleable and whatever. I mean, it just seems so ridiculous to me. But hey, what are you gonna do? So that's just pretty crazy. But he does bring up the fact that in the first initial hours of after something like that, that Penny's memory would have been somewhat malleable. It would have been somewhat kind of in flux. So anyways, so then we'll move on to the fact that, and then Shaun goes on to talk about the fact that they were able to do all this neutralizing of these alibi witnesses and everything that they were able to do, even though Penny clearly states that her attacker wore underwear. Now, think what you like of Stephen Avery, okay? But the man did not own any underwear. Yeah, that's really weird and strange and maybe a little disgusting. But the fact of the matter is that simple fact should have, as disturbing as it might be to some people, should have been a clear bell ringing. Ding, 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 ding. You have the wrong guy. But didn't turn out that way. So, hey. But it's, I mean, seriously. Huge thing. So there was also an officer who was ready to testify that Stephen had concrete dust on his clothes for that day. That there was concrete dust all over his clothes. Further reinforcing the fact that he was helping pour concrete that day. So, I mean, how much more, proof could there be? I mean, obviously, Vogel was framing this in a way. He was, setting this all up and presenting it in a way to where it only pointed to Stephen, or that it made Stephen all look guilty, and obviously wasn't bringing up Gregory Allen at all. And but then we go into what he does. We'll go into what he does to basically all of Stephen's alibi witnesses. He basically uses this assumption that they were all talking to each other about this and they got all together on their story. And the reason why their stories all match is because they all got together and talked about it and came up with a story. So the way he does this, is when he has them up on the stand, he starts asking him. He basically says, if they have discussed this case among themselves while they're on the stand. He just asks them, have you discussed this case amongst yourselves or whatever? If they said yes, that they had discussed it, which, seriously, is it that odd that people would discuss something that was happening to somebody that they were close to and cared about? Putting that aside, if they said yes, they were deemed collaborators. If they said no, they were deemed liars. Mama Avery, Dolores, and Barb were basically two of the ones that said no. Dolores herself, she's such a gem. I love her. Dolores herself tells Vogel when Vogel's trying to break her down and trying to get her to answer and trying to get her to say that she talked about it or whatever. She comes back with, I don't have to figure out what happened on the 29th because I already know what happened on the 29th. So I gotta say, I loved that. I love it. It's great. Dolores is a champ. She's awesome. So, but yeah, I don't need to talk. I don't need to figure out what happened because I already know what happened. And she's awesome. Dude, she is so awesome. So, anyways, that's pretty much it for strategy 7. Neutralizing honest witnesses. And next we'll be talking about strategy 8, which is procuring dishonest witnesses. So that'll be interesting. Anyways, anybody out there, if you haven't already and you're watching this and you enjoyed it, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you guys soon.